Tonight, she threatens some of our biggest cities, but Irene delivered her real punch out of town. The floodwaters rush in and the power goes out. Jim Axelrod, Wyatt Andrews, and Michelle Miller are in the storm zone. Mark Strassman is following the airline's attempts to get back in the sky now that Irene has cleared out. As Gaddafi's family escapes, Barry Peterson has discovered the high-flying life the dictator was living. And Anthony Mason with the new journalists in a world where everyone carries a camera.
And that I was frantically deleting old videos from my camera to open up space for it.
This is the CBS Evening News with Scott Pelley.
Good evening. Turns out it wasn't the wind, it was the water. Long after Hurricane Irene fell apart, rain from the storm did the greatest damage. Parts of 13 states, from North Carolina to Maine, are deep in floodwaters. At least 35 people have died in the region. Some homes were reduced to rubble. Nearly 5 million homes and businesses are spending another night without power. Even in a flood, there was fire. In Pompton Lakes, New Jersey, this home erupted. They think it was a gas line that broke. The house was safely evacuated. Floodwaters that wiped out bridges cut off more than a dozen towns in Vermont and 3 in New York. We have a team of correspondents in the storm zone. First, Jim Axelrod in Windham, New York.
Scott, it all happened in a flash here in this small town in New York's Catskill Mountains. Let me show you what I'm talking about. Irene dumped more than 10 inches of rain into the Batavia Kill Creek in just a matter of a couple of hours. And as the water washed across the street here, check this out. The road just washes away. Look at that telephone pole or that car over in the hole. Main Street is wrecked. None of the 1,800 people who live in Windham, New York had any idea what was about to happen as Irene moved in. Certainly not Antonia Schreiber.
We thought we were going to lose electricity. At most.
You didn't think you were going to lose your store?
No.
Less than an hour later, the 26-year-old owner of this full-service day spa knew it would be far worse.
It was coming down Main Street. It was a raging river. This little creek, which is still larger than normal, was gushing against that bridge at full force, and we saw the bridge, and that was when we decided we had to evacuate.
Known as the city on the mountaintop, higher ground didn't help, as up to 4 feet of water went rushing through Windham. 24 hours ago, where would the water be on us? Up to our waists?
It would be up to our chest.
The water was this high 24 hours ago?
You can see it on the house. This was our waiting room.
Her ruined business is a reminder for people who think Irene packed little punch. 5 years of Antonia Schreiber's hard work is covered in mud, and she's not alone.
It'll be okay. The tears are for everyone and for us and what's to come, and how can you not cry? It's a beautiful town. It's a beautiful community, and you see what's happening.
Heartbreaking.
It's devastating.
Antonia Schreiber also had 8 employees who are also out of work now, and Scott, she had no flood insurance.
Jim, how many miles inland are you? Have they ever been affected by a tropical storm before?
No, they've been affected by blizzards plenty of times. They haven't had a hurricane here in more than half a century. Hurricane Donna in 1960.
Jim, thanks very much. This is a day of incredible pictures, but one image that got us all crowded around a monitor in the newsroom today was this. You gotta give the New Jersey National Guard credit for guts and determination. 2 National Guard trucks drove into the floodwaters in Manville, New Jersey. These are the Army's new 5-ton trucks. They are equipped for high water, but not quite this high. The trucks are also equipped with an escape hatch in the roof, which finally came in handy. The guardsmen abandoned the truck. This picture came in later. No one was hurt, but those faces sure tell a story. The story in Vermont is one of a state that never expected to be hit so hard by a storm that started as a hurricane. Wyatt Andrews is in southern Vermont this evening.
Scott, here in the Green Mountains of New York, the residents told me the 8 inches of rain they got from Irene seemed to come down all at once, and that turned the tiniest of mountain streams into the Mississippi. No hurricane warning ever prepared people in the mountains for this. Whole houses were washed off the mountainside and deposited on the road. Others were shredded and embedded in the trees. Vermont is still counting the number of washed out bridges, including the famous covered bridge in Bartonsville.
Oh my God!
Which gave way to an unprecedented wall of water. But it's the dozens of backcountry roads that are now washed out and buckled which are causing the greatest concern. On the other side of these mountain roads, hundreds of residents are stranded, and an exodus from the hills has begun.
You can see bits and pieces of houses in the trees. It's terrible. It's like absolutely devastating.
With residents like Rob and Quinn Cartelli carrying out what they can. For now, you're moving out?
We're not going to have power for months.
This is the Rock River in south central Vermont, a river that we're told is normally so tranquil you can walk across it. Yesterday, however, this river almost instantly crested 12 to 15 feet, and this pile of debris is someone's home that's washed down from upriver. Windham County Sheriff Keith Clark says so many roads are destroyed, he can't count the number of people stranded or homeless.
There are places in my county I can't get to yet.
You're worried about that?
I am worried about people that are isolated. We know that in one town we have people that are on dialysis that can't get out to get their treatments. We're trying to get vehicles to them.
The high water in Vermont has finally crested, we are told, but for all of the concern last week over Irene's storm surge, Scott, the damage in New England came from river surge.
Thanks, Wyatt. Surging water and high wind drop power lines, and this evening, millions are facing days without electricity. Michelle Miller is in northern New Jersey.
This downed tree in Maplewood, New Jersey has become a life and death obstacle for Pam Katuth.
I was out of my mind, hysterical.
The tree has left her in the dark and unable to care for her disabled husband and autistic son.
My husband is very uncomfortable right now. He's got a lot of injuries from his accident, and I just feel like it's just not a safe place.
Nearby, people are finding themselves relying on neighbors in the other end of an orange extension cord.
We literally ran downstairs.
At the height of the storm, Andrea Garrido's power went out, and so did her only defense against flooding, her sump pump. She reached out to a friend who plugged her right in.
I mean, that is our lifeline. It really, without it, we would have had a complete disaster in our basement.
Water level was up to here. I mean, I think if you look over here, you can see the results of it.
15 miles away in Morristown, New Jersey, 10,000 people are still without power. Here's why. The last time this electrical substation flooded was during Hurricane Floyd in 1999. A flood wall was then built that was designed to stop a 100-year flood. That wall was breached Sunday morning.
The water just came right over. You couldn't see this wall when this substation flooded.
Up and down the East Coast, power crews have been overwhelmed by the amount of damage to the electrical grid. Hurricane Irene knocked out power to almost 8 million homes in 13 states, and more than half are still waiting for it to come back on. 600,000 homes are still powerless here in New Jersey alone, and they may be waiting as long as a week.
We had a hurricane that hit New Jersey. You know, it caused all kinds of problems. It really impacted so much of our infrastructure across the state.
Andrea Garrido is taking no chances.
How long will you be without power?
Well, PSE&G, they were saying 3 to 5 days. My neighbor told me he got an email saying up to 7, so we're not really sure.
Will you stay connected?
We will be connected. Yes.
And what makes a scene like this so dangerous is that people assume that downed power lines in a blacked out neighborhood are dead. But police tell us, Scott, assume they're not.
Thanks, Michelle. Irene caused the largest two-day public transportation shutdown since 9/11. Today, the airports in New York, Boston, and Philadelphia reopened, although more than 1,600 flights were canceled. Mark Strassman at New York's LaGuardia Airport looked into what it takes to get the airlines back in the air.
Remember, Scott, we're talking about the world's most complex public transportation system. Restarting it involves a lot more than flipping a switch.
Everyone has a boarding pass? Can you get boarding passes?
Delta ticket agent Tanya Del Prat is the calm center of LaGuardia Airport's new storm, rebooking.
Will they be checking in the bags on?
Delta Airlines alone has to help 100,000 stranded passengers. It canceled another 400 flights today.
Okay, what time is your departure? We try to find flights as best that we can. Even sometimes we have to call like another airline, even though they're experiencing the same problems.
Not everyone's going to get out today.
Not everyone is going to get out.
13,600 flights across the country were grounded. Some travelers may have to wait until the end of the week to get where they want to go. Mark Rosenker is a CBS News transportation analyst.
Aircraft right now may well be in the wrong airports. The crews may well be in the wrong cities. All of these have to be put back together in a sequenced fashion.
Getting back on track was a challenge across the Northeast. New York subways reopened, but first, inspectors had to walk all 660 miles of track. Washed out tracks, fallen trees, and mudslides still block commuter lines. And Amtrak still has no service between Boston and Philadelphia.
The flight is on time.
For Tanya Del Prat and everyone working in the Northeast's people-moving business, it's like watching a sleeping beast stir back to life.
As long as you give them option to say, okay, your flight is tomorrow, but you can try to stand by for today. At least having some kind of hope, they do feel better.
Another reason to get these stranded passengers moving through as quickly as possible, right behind them, a real tidal wave is coming, Scott. 2.5 million air travelers over Labor Day weekend.
Mark, thank you very much. From a much higher altitude, we got to look today at a remarkable technology the federal government is using to instantly assess storm damage. A satellite flew over North Carolina's Outer Banks and shot overlapping pictures of nearly every square foot. When you zoom in to this picture in particular, you see where Highway 12 is cut in half near Rodanthe. The pictures show where the trouble is and helps responders figure out how to get there. As Gaddafi's people lived in poverty, the dictator was living like a king. A less than diplomatic exchange between Colin Powell and Dick Cheney, and eyewitness images of Irene when the CBS Evening News continues. Another sign today that Muammar Gaddafi's rule in Libya is over. His wife and 2 sons have now fled over the border to Algeria. Gaddafi is still on the run. Today, we saw disturbing pictures of atrocities from the revolution and evidence of the lifestyle the Gaddafis enjoyed while so many people suffered. Barry Peterson is investigating the remnants of the regime.
In the last days of fighting with defeat looming, Gaddafi's soldiers turned their guns on more than 50 civilian prisoners held in a building. Soldiers threw in grenades, then set the building on fire. There were a lot of dead and a lot of wounded, says this witness. And even the wounded, they executed in the end. But atrocities are shared by both sides. Rebels killed, surrendered soldiers. It is part of the cruelty of this war, but Libyans have lived with another kind of cruelty most of their lives. Struggling in an oil-rich country where a middle-class family survives on $330 a month and roughly 1/3 live at or below the poverty line. While Gaddafi and his family lacked for nothing. Some of their fancy houses are now in rebel hands with their jet skis and hot tubs and lavish surroundings. This home belonged to one of his sons, a seaside retreat complete with a baby grand piano. Other houses stretch down the coast. The use of alcohol is forbidden in the Muslim religion, but when the rebels came across this place, they found the bar was fully stocked with expensive liquor. But nothing says lifestyles of the rich and infamous. Oh my. Very pretty, very private, and like a $150 million private jet. Your own bed. From here, the family's private pilots would fly them anywhere in the world, and traveling by private jet was just the beginning of the millions the Gaddafi family would spend. One son, according to a British newspaper, went through $2 million a month on trips to Paris or London, including $7,000 haircuts. This is a piece of china from one of the houses that the rebels now control, trimmed in 24-karat gold, a remnant of the Gaddafi family's Gilded Age. Scott?
Thank you, Barry. At least one notorious figure has been located in Tripoli. Abdel Basset al-Megrahi, the convicted bomber of Pan Am Flight 103. His family says he's in and out of a coma and near death. He was released from a Scottish prison 2 years ago when he was said to be suffering from terminal cancer. Not even a hurricane could stop Colin Powell from getting to the set of Face the Nation. He had something he wanted to tell Bob Schieffer, and that story is next. Former Vice President Dick Cheney takes aim at some of his colleagues in the George W. Bush administration in a new book coming out tomorrow. Cheney is critical of, among others, former Secretary of State Colin Powell. On Sunday's Face the Nation, Powell responded, objecting in particular to the words Cheney is using in promoting the book.
What really sort of got my attention was this way in which he characterized it. It's going to cause heads to explode. That's quite a visual. And in fact, it's the kind of headline I would expect to come out of a gossip columnist, or the kind of headline you might see one of the supermarket tabloids write. It's not the kind of headline I would have expected to come from a former Vice President of the United States of America.
Joining us now is Bob Schieffer, the anchor of Face the Nation. And Bob, for the nation's former first diplomat, Secretary Powell seemed to be visibly angry in this interview.
You know, Scott, I mean, he had steam coming out of his ears. He was really upset by these things, and he wanted to get his side of it in. I mean, just listen to this.
Mr. Cheney has had a long and distinguished career, and I hope in his book that's what he will focus on, not these cheap shots that he's taking at me and other members of the administration who served to the best of our ability for President Bush. So I think it's a bit too far. I think Dick overshot the runway with that kind of comment, and if that's how he plans to sell his book.
It was just amazing to watch this unfold, Scott. It was almost as if he were saying, look, the former vice president's free to say whatever he wants to say, but he should not get the idea that I'm going to just sit here and take it.
Bob, I wonder, what does this tell us about the Bush administration that we didn't know before?
I think what it tells us, Scott, is something a little more about what we probably already knew. We knew that there was a lot of friction between the State Department, the Pentagon, and the Vice President's office. I think this book and this former secretary's reaction to it shows us just how deep those divisions were, and they still have not been resolved.
Bob Schieffer, our chief Washington correspondent, thank you very much.
Thank you, Scott.
And in the spirit of full disclosure, Cheney's book is being published by Simon & Schuster, which is owned by CBS. Some of the more enduring images of Hurricane Irene were taken by accidental journalists. We'll have a look next. We sure have been seeing a lot of nature's destructive side lately, but today we also saw some of its beauty. A news helicopter from our Miami station shot this video of two water spouts forming 6 miles offshore. It appears they developed out of an ordinary rain cloud and disappeared without doing any damage. We end tonight with images of Irene taken by people just like you. Anthony Mason has the story and the pictures.
As Irene threatened the lower Bartonsville Bridge in Vermont on Sunday, Susan Hammond grabbed her little flip camera and took this video. But she was running out of memory.
And that I was frantically deleting old videos from my camera to open up space for it.
And then it happened.
There it goes. So was that the last bit of footage you had room for on the camera?
Oh yeah, that was it.
Hammond, who runs a nonprofit, caught one of the defining images of the storm. Across the internet's social networks, the people who witness events increasingly are telling the story themselves. On the photo site Flickr, Dylan Nord posted this picture of the storm surge in Long Branch, New Jersey. Bill Kurtz, a public school teacher, took this shot in West Haven, Connecticut, before being knocked over by a giant wave. These citizen journalists often have an emotional attachment to their subjects. Chris Dimmick photographed his sister's house in Manville, New Jersey. In Vermont, Susan Hammond had grown up near that covered bridge.
How did you feel when you saw that through your lens?
Oh my God. It was devastating, as you can tell.
I put all my photos on Flickr after I take them.
28-year-old Chris Shanebaum doesn't care about being paid. He just loves to share his pictures, like this one.
On the top of the photo, you've got these dark clouds, which is a bit scary looking.
But then the sun and the end of Irene. Anthony Mason, CBS News, New York.
Worth 1,000 words. That's the CBS Evening News for tonight. For all of us at CBS News all around the world, good night.